Hello everyone and welcome to the North American Diesel's Iceberg, made by me. This iceberg covers some of the most obscure and mysterious things relating to Canadian, American, and Mexican diesel locomotives. If you don't know what an iceberg is, look it up. I'm not putting a redundant explanation in my video like every other iceberg YouTuber does. This will be a part 1 of 2, covering the first 5 layers, and part 2 will cover the other 5. With that said, let's begin with layer 1. CNKC. CNKC is the assumed name of the end result of a possible railroad that could have been created in 2023 when Canadian National tried to merge with/buy Kansas City Southern. The merger was rejected, though, due to the extreme size of the new railroad and the creation of many redundant routes. Canadian Pacific stepped in and continued the bidding war, and eventually merged with KCS instead, creating today's CPKC. Cross-Mafia Hydraulics. The Cross-Mafias were diesel hydraulic locomotives ordered by the SP and Rio Grande in the 1960s to pull heavy trains over the steep grades on their systems. They weren't very successful, though, and were quickly retired. Today, SP number 9010 is the only one left, and it's in operational condition at the Niles Canyon Railway. For more info on these unique units, watch the video by fellow YouTuber High Iron. CSX sticker units. Before CSX's current fleet of heritage units, they had a fleet of heritage in air quotes units with the logos of predecessor railroads on the nose, starting with a handful of Dash 8s and slowly adding more modern engines as the years went on. When the Dash 8s were withdrawn, Gevos were assigned their stickers. 3415 is the last sticker unit, before the current heritage fleet was started. Today, all the units retain their stickers, even the Dash 8s, which were sold off. NS 1030 and 1111. NS 1030 and 1111 are both aces that are still in service on NS currently. And despite only having the normal paint scheme, they're both considered special units, with the 1111 even being tracked on heritageunits.com. 1111 is because the NS Sans font NS uses on their locomotives makes ones just straight lines, making for quite an oddity on 1111, and giving it the nickname of the barcode unit. 1030 doesn't look interesting, but it's only notable because it was used during the 2012 Heritage Units gathering to represent NS's current scheme, with its number boards even being swapped out. ATSF War Bonnet Hump Sets. Recently, BNSF has been pulling the ancient ATSF war bonnets off the main line and putting them in hump service and in yard service. The hump sets are either 3 war bonnets or 2 of them sandwiching an ST40-2B. These will be the last ever assignments of the war bonnets, so catch them while you can. It's currently unknown if any of the BNSF war bonnets or fake bonnets will also be reassigned to yard work, but let's hope they won't be anytime soon. CSX Spirit of Units. This entry refers to the CSX practice of naming locomotives after places along their system by giving them the name Spirit of that place. The tradition actually started with the Chesapeake in Ohio, but CSX continued it in the 90s and 2000s, but they seemingly don't do it anymore. A few of the units like the AC-60s, AC-44s, and SD-70 Max have already been retired or rebuilt, with any ones that have been repainted/rebuilt losing the Spirit name on the nose. Some do remain in service to this day, and there's certainly a nice break from standard power. NS 1700 EL Heritage. Alongside NS's 21 main heritage units, they also have a handful of living heritage units, engines built for predecessor railroads and restored to their original paint schemes by NS. Out of these, NS SD45 1700 is the most interesting because, well, one, NS still has it on their roster, while the others were only restored to be sold off to museums. And it commemorates Erie Lackawanna, which doesn't have a standard heritage unit, the only living heritage unit that does. This unit is part of only 5 SD40-5s left on the roster of Norfolk Southern, so who knows how much long it has left. So try to see it if you ever get the chance. Layer 2. CSX 9969. CSX 9969 is a GP40WH-2 built by Morris Knutson for the Maryland Area Regional Commuter Service. It served like that until 2011 when it was replaced by an MP36PH-3C and auctioned off. CSX purchased the unit and uses it for maintenance of way and track inspection service, alongside CSX's fleet of ex-Amtrak F40PHs. It's also notable since it's tracked on the heritageunits.com app, one of the very few engines on the site to not have a special paint scheme. SP Popsicle Daylight Revival. In the 1970s, Southern Pacific tested out a bright orange and red paint scheme on a few of its locomotives. All of the newly rebuilt MKTE70-4S locomotives were given this scheme, along with a few SD units and Jeeps. Ultimately, they chose to stick with the classic gray and scarlet, and the scheme was abandoned. Interestingly, though, the original reason why it was nicknamed the Popsicle Scheme has been lost to time. D&H XEL SD45s. After being used as demonstrator units, the first three EMD SD-45s were sold to the D&H, where they worked until they were swapped to the Erie Lackawanna for three GE U-33Cs. Eventually, though, they did return to D&H, and they were patched in quite an interesting way, with D&H painting the EL maroon bands into D&H blue, making a unique paint scheme. They served like that until they were sold to Mexico in 1978. They were all scrapped. CN 2415 crashes. Canadian National 2415 was a GE C40-8M that was involved in 3 wrecks during its career, but was repaired all 3 times and lasted until the end of its service life in 2023. It's the only Dash 8 known to have accomplished this feat. Cal Unit Productions made a documentary on this unit, so now it's relatively common knowledge, but I still think it's crazy that this thing managed to survive 3 separate wrecks. How many GEVOs BNSF has? BNSF GEVOs are stupidly common, but have you ever wondered how many there actually are? Finding it out, however, is actually quite difficult. It's not as simple as just Googling it. They have a total of 721 ES44 DCs, 765 ES44 ACs, 1,280 ES44C4s, 361 ET44C4s, and 800 ET44 ACHs, making for a grand total of 3,841 GEVOs. Guess that's why BNSF is so mundane. CSX 8888 renumbered 4389. Everybody knows about CSX 8888, the ST-40-2 that ended up as a runaway in 2001 and inspired the 2010 movie Unstoppable. CSX, however, loves to rebuild their EMDs, and 8888 wasn't spared. Despite several museums trying to get their hands on it in ST-40-2 condition, CSX didn't want a museum to get it because, well, that would glorify their horrible mistake. So it was one of the first ST-40-2s picked for the ST-40-3 rebuild program. CSX didn't even communicate the renumbering, and it was only found out that 8888 became 4389 from a shop worker. Today, the unit is still in service and isn't treated as anything special. Hopefully it will be preserved and restored to its original condition, but that is extremely unlikely. EMD SD80 ACE. The EMD/Progress Rail SD80 ACE is a slightly more powerful export version of the SD70 ACE, taking advantage of the slightly less strict emissions regulations abroad in order to squeeze more power out of the engine. It was designed to be able to handle higher temperatures and low axle loads common on South American railroads. It's currently the only 80 series locomotive in existence, following the scrapping of the last SD80 Max. And, with Layer 2 done, it's time to move on to Layer 3. Death Star -9s. Just before they were bought out by CN, Illinois Central placed an order for an unknown amount of -9s from GE. These would have been painted in the Death Star scheme like all of IC's other engines, but when CN bought IC, the engines had yet to arrive, and so CN simply asked GE to paint them into CN paints instead. Today, they still roam the rails, aside from the ones that have been rebuilt, with a small IC under the cab. UP High Hood U-25Bs. When GE released the U-25B in 1956, many railroads decided to try them out, and many liked them. UP didn't. They were simply too weak for their purposes, but interestingly, UP ordered them with a high hood, despite the low hood being standard. It's unknown why UP would do this, considering they already had some low hood X-demonstrator U-25Bs, but okay. GP70. The GP70 was a proposed 4-axle version of the EMD SD70, introduced in EMD's 1992 catalog. Due to the general disinterest in 4-axle engines at the time, no orders were ever placed. We can assume it would have had the same specs as the standard cab SD70, just with 4 axles, but besides that, we know nothing. More extensive BNSF patches. In the early days of BNSF, a unique question arose as to how to patch the predecessor locomotives. They experimented with patching the number and logos, placing the new BNSF number under the cab in an elongated oval, giving the units the nickname of Pill, and moving the headlight to the nose sometimes. After doing it on 5 units, 3 Cascade Greens and 2 Blue Bonnets, they canceled the program and left the units unpatched with only the reporting marks replaced. Today, all the units that got the Pill paint scheme have either been repainted, sold, or patched again, aside from the 2911, which is still working in local service in the South Chicago area. CSX Heritage Unit Fade Removal confirmed. This entry refers to a Change.org petition to repaint the CSX Heritage units to have the full fallen flag colors and remove the fade design. On June 13, 2023, the petition was declared a victory with the following message. Mr. Joseph Hinrichs, the CEO of CSX Transportation, said that the units are in fact being repainted and the C&O unit is next. Thank you all for your support, and of course, thank you Joseph Hinrichs. Of course, this didn't happen, and the CSX Heritage units continued to be released with the fade design. It's unknown why the petition was declared a success, since no official statement about the fade's removal was ever made. Santa Fe SD26. The Santa Fe SD26 was a rebuild of the extremely average EMD SD24, done from 1973 to 1978, by the Santa Fe, of course. The result was a significantly better engine than the SD24. Strangely, though, Santa Fe classified them using the old EMD classification system, designating them as SD26 because of their 26,025 horsepower. This is strange, as they usually made a unique name for all of their rebuilds. In 1985, they were all withdrawn and sold to Guilford Rail System, where they worked until 2011, and then they were all scrapped. Decapitated switcher. Yeah, this is exactly what it sounds like. Monon SW1, number 50, the first diesel they ever owned, had its cab sheared off when it was being transported out of the Indiana Transportation Museum in 2018. The locomotive was being hauled on a flatbed truck, which apparently took a wrong turn in Logansport, Indiana, and hit a low bridge. The loco was severely damaged, but is currently being rebuilt by the Hoosier Valley Railroad Museum. Layer 4. The 84th B40-8W. The 84th B40-8W entry actually refers to the first one, GECX 809. This engine was the prototype of the class and was the first ever GE locomotive to use a comfort cab. The cab is a tri-window design that definitely reeks of the 80s and was never used on any other locomotives. The engine was presumed to be scrapped around 2012, but was recently spotted still lingering in Wabtec's Erie, Pennsylvania plant. Hope to make a video exclusively on this engine soon. It's one of the most interesting things on this Iceberg in my opinion. If you'd like to see that video, comment or something. Original E5 design. During the early design stages of EMD's E5, a design was drawn up with the cab based on the CB&Q Zephyr trains. The E5 was a Burlington route exclusive, so it made sense to use the unique cab. Ultimately, though, it was scrapped in favor of the standard shovel nose design. Too bad, as this would have been an awesome and very unique locomotive. 2000s leaser craze. This entry refers to a brief time on CSX between 1999 when they absorbed Conrail and 2002 when their last order of AC-44s arrived. There was a general lack of locomotives, and so engines from all the leasing companies under the sun were leased to keep up with the work. In addition to Conrail engines and old CSX schemes, less than 50% of engines on CSX at the time were actually in modern CSX paint, making for an insane time to rail fan, and one that was sadly barely documented. They all went to Mexico. This entry refers to the practice of American railroads sending their outdated locomotives to Mexico for continued service in the 70s and 80s. Many of them were scrapped immediately, while others were repainted, and some even entered service in an unpatched state. NDM was in a major power crisis throughout these decades, and with extremely limited government funds, they were forced to purchase second-hand power. Today, most of the imported engines have been scrapped, although a few remain in revenue service, and a few of the older ones have even escaped back into the U.S. The real reason Southern ran Longhood forward. It's commonly known that the Southern Railway ran their diesels Longhood forward. Most people believe the reason was to protect the crew in the event of a collision, but that has never actually been stated officially. The real reason is, like most things in railroading, a cost-cutting measure. It meant that Southern didn't have to waste time turning around the locomotives at the end of their run, or pay the people who did it because there was no front end. At the time, the FRA mandated that locomotives had to be facing forward on every single train, but by officially classifying the Longhead as the front, it meant that the argument could really be made that the locomotives were always traveling forwards, thus getting around the regulation. Modified Santa Fe text on the SD75Ms. This one is pretty self-explanatory. On Santa Fe's 1994 order of EMD SD75Ms, the text applied to the side is not the standard text used on the GEs and GP60Ms. It's unknown why they changed it. My best guess is that they didn't want the text and radiator to overlap. This slightly modified font was never used on any other engines, and with no war bonnet SD75Ms left, it's become pretty obscure. Layer 5. B36-8 prototype. The GE B36-8 was a Dash 8 variant that simply never entered production. The only one ever built was GECX number 606. With only 3,600 horsepower, it was simply too weak for the railroads of the time. As a result, it's extremely obscure. The image I've been showing right now is the only decent quality image of the unit on the internet. The 606 hasn't been seen in decades and has most likely been scrapped by GE following the end of Dash 8 production. MK5000C. The Morris Knudsen MK5000C is a 5,000 horsepower diesel locomotive first produced in 1994. It was MK's first locomotive, and it wasn't really successful due to having awful reliability thanks to its Caterpillar engines and incompatibility with other manufacturers' locomotives. They were designed to meet the railroad's demands for higher horsepower engines in the 90s, and so a few orders were still placed, but they quickly stopped after the debut of the EMD SD90 Mac and GE AC6000. Today, all 6 units that were built have been rebuilt and are under the G&W company, the Kyle Railroad. The actual number of fake bonnets. Well, unlike the number of BNSF GEVOs, we have no idea how many fake bonnets are left in service, or even how many were made in the first place. I could do like a ridiculous amount of research to figure it out, but I'm lazy, and this section is basically just a disguise for me to ask someone to please calculate how many fake bonnets are still left in service on BNSF. Thank you, and comment the answer, please, 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 I want to know. Anyways, next section. SD55 and SD65. The SD55 and SD65 were both proposed and cataloged EMD locomotives, but neither were ever ordered. A test for the SD55s was actually produced in the form of the SD45X, but it sucked, probably discouraging railroads from ordering the SD55, and the SD65 just came at the wrong time when railroads just wanted the most powerful engines they could get. A less powerful SD70 wasn't going to sell, plus the catastrophic failure of the SD50 had already tarnished EMD's reputation. Amtrak ICE painted F69 PHAC. When the German ICE-1 high-speed train went on its tour of the U.S. in 1993, it started service on the Northeast Corridor. Afterwards, Amtrak wanted to bring it around the rest of the country, but since it was powered by overhead wires, it had to be pulled by diesels. Since Amtrak couldn't repaint the ICE, they had to repaint 2 diesels if they wanted the train to match. They chose to repaint their pair of F69 PHACs, as those were only used for experiments and were never in revenue service. They remained in that livery until they were retired by Amtrak. Strangely, the X2000 Swedish-built train was also going on tour at the time, but it was pulled by standard Amtrak painted engines, which is kind of weird considering how much effort they went through for the ICE train to match. The class leader debate. A class leader is, well, depending on who you ask, a class leader is either the engine of a certain class with the lowest road number or the first one built on a specific railroad. Normally these line up, but in the case of something like a merger, they don't. This has sparked a debate between really hardcore rail fans, which is showing no signs of stopping anytime soon. I personally think the lowest number makes more sense since it's a class leader, so it should be leading the group of engines, so it should have the lowest number, but that's just my opinion. Rapid transit maintenance of way diesels. Rapid transit networks are usually thought of as electric railroads, which, to be fair, they are. However, they still need to maintain their track, and oftentimes it's not safe to do that while the power is on, as it could electrocute MAO workers. So these railroads often employ diesels to run on their lines for MAO work, as they don't need the electricity. Being that these engines work on rarely filmed lines, and usually only at night or when the line is closed, they're generally very obscure and rarely photographed. And that's part 1 of the North American Diesel's Iceberg. This was quite difficult to make, so I much appreciate you watching till the end. If this video does well, I still have 5 more layers to cover in a part 2, so look forward to that. With all that said, I hope you enjoyed and catch those units while you can.